Black homeless woman raises 3 white orphan children without knowing they would become millionaires in future and help her when she needed the most. The lawyer handed Margaret 3 envelopes at the same time. Her hands, weathered and arthritic at 71, trembled as she held them. Each envelope had a name written in elegant script. Daniel, Emma, Michael, inside each one, $500,000. $1.5 million total. From the 3 white children she'd raised in a homeless shelter 30 years ago when she had nothing but food stamps and a broken-down car to sleep in. "They've been looking for you for 7 years, the lawyer said quietly. "They never stopped." Margaret stared at the checks, then at the eviction notice on her kitchen table. 3 days. She had 3 days before losing the tiny apartment that had taken her 15 years to afford. And now this. Now them. "Why?" she whispered. The lawyer smiled. "Because you chose them when no one else would. And they never forgot." But what Margaret didn't know was that finding her had cost them everything. Their reputations, their relationships, their financial security. And the story of how 3 abandoned white children and 1 homeless black woman became family would force an entire system to face what it had broken. 30 years earlier, Margaret Davis sat in her 1987 Chevy Malibu in the parking lot of St. Catherine's Emergency Shelter in Oakland, California. It was January 1995. Rain hammered the windshield. The car smelled like mildew and desperation. She was 41 years old. 3 months homeless. The eviction had come fast. Medical bills from her mother's cancer treatment, $47,000 that insurance wouldn't cover. Margaret had been a home health aide making $8.50 an hour. She'd paid what she could, then couldn't pay rent. The landlord didn't care about dying mothers or payment plans. Out in 30 days. Her car became home. The shelter parking lot became her address. She'd shower at the public gym, $3 for a day pass she could barely afford. She'd work her shifts, then sleep in the back seat with a blanket that didn't keep out the cold. But she still had her dignity. Still had her faith. Still believed God had a plan, even when the plan looked like freezing to death in a parking lot. That morning, she'd gone into St. Catherine's to use the bathroom. The shelter didn't allow overnight stays for single women without children. Only families. Margaret didn't qualify. But they'd let her use the facilities during the day. Inside Kiss. A white woman, maybe 30, strung out on something, was screaming at the intake coordinator. 3 children stood behind her. 2 boys and a girl. The oldest looked maybe 6. The youngest, 3. All blonde, all terrified, all filthy. "I can't do this anymore," the woman screamed. "They're not even mine. My sister dumped them on me and disappeared." "Ma'am, you can't just leave children here," the coordinator said, a black woman named Sharon with infinite patience in her voice. "Watch me." The woman turned toward the door. "Ma'am, that's abandonment. That's a crime. Then arrest me. I don't care. I'm done." She walked out. Just walked out. The glass door swung shut behind her. The 3 children stood there, frozen. The oldest boy, dark blue eyes, started crying silently. Tears just streaming down his face without sound. The little girl clutched a stuffed rabbit with 1 ear missing. The youngest boy sucked his thumb. Sharon was already on the phone. "Yes, CPS, I have 3 abandoned minors. White children, ages approximately 3 to 6. Mother just walked out. We need immediate placement." Margaret watched from the bathroom doorway. Watched Sharon hang up with a heavy sigh. "How long?" another staff member asked. 4 hours minimum before they can send someone. Maybe longer. "We can't hold them here. We're not licensed." "I know that, Patricia. I'm just telling you what they said." The oldest boy was still crying. The sound was wrong. Too quiet. Too practiced. Like he'd learned that making noise made things worse. Margaret walked over. She knelt down, her knees protesting, and looked at him eye level. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly. "What's your name?" The boy looked at her, then at Sharon, like he was asking permission to speak. "It's okay," Sharon said gently. "You can tell her." "Daniel," the boy whispered. "Daniel. That's a strong name." Margaret smiled. "I'm Margaret. Are you hungry?" All three children nodded. Margaret looked at Sharon. Can I take them to get some food? Sharon hesitated. I'm not supposed to release them to anyone who's not. I'm not taking them anywhere but the McDonald's across the street. You can watch us through the window. But these babies need to eat. Sharon looked at the children, then at Margaret, then at the phone where CPS had just told her to wait indefinitely. 30 minutes, Sharon said. And I'm watching. Margaret had $12 in her pocket. It was supposed to last 3 days. Gas money, maybe a cheap meal, soap from the dollar store. She took the children to McDonald's. Ordered 3 Happy Meals. $9.87. She had $2.13 left. The children ate like they hadn't seen food in days. They probably hadn't. Daniel, the oldest, made sure his siblings ate first before touching his own food. Margaret watched him split his fries between Emma, the girl, and Michael, the youngest. You need to eat too, baby, Margaret said. They're littler, Daniel said simply. Something in Margaret's chest cracked open. After they ate, they went back to the shelter. CPS still hadn't arrived. Sharon looked exhausted. I have to leave for a shift at 2, Sharon said. If CPS isn't here by then, I don't know what happens to them. It was 1:15. Margaret looked at the 3 children sitting on the plastic chairs, Emma clutching her one-eared rabbit, Michael falling asleep against Daniel's shoulder, Daniel watching everything with eyes too old for 6 years. What if I stayed with them? Margaret heard herself say. Sharon turned. What? Until CPS comes. What if I just stayed? Sat with them. Made sure they're okay. Margaret, you can't, you're not. Sharon stopped. Looked at the children. Looked at the clock. Made a decision that probably violated several policies. If you're here as a volunteer, sitting in the waiting area, and these children happen to also be in the waiting area, I suppose I can't control that. I suppose not. Sharon left at 2. CPS didn't arrive until 6:30. 4.5 hours. Margaret sat with those children the entire time. Took them to the bathroom. Found crackers in the shelter pantry. Told them stories. Sang them songs her mother had sung to her. When the CPS worker finally arrived, a white woman in her 50s with a clipboard and exhausted eyes, she barely looked at the children. We're taking them to emergency foster placement, she said. Group home probably. We're over capacity right now. All 3 together? Margaret asked. Probably not. We don't have homes that can take 3. Daniel grabbed Margaret's hand. His grip was desperate. Please don't let them split us up, he whispered. The CPS worker was already filling out paperwork. We do our best, but... What if I took them? Margaret said. Everyone stopped. The CPS worker looked up. I'm sorry, what? What if I became their foster parent? All 3. Keep them together. The worker's expression shifted to something between pity and condescension. Ma'am, fostering requires background checks, home studies, stable housing. I have housing, Margaret lied. You'd need bedrooms for them, adequate space, proof of income. I work full-time. I'm a home health aide. The worker looked at Sharon. Sharon looked at Margaret. Something passed between them. Understanding. Desperation. A mutual decision to bend rules that needed breaking. She volunteers here regularly, Sharon said carefully. Very reliable. Good with children. It wasn't exactly a lie. Margaret had been there for 5 hours. The worker sighed. Looked at the children. Looked at her watch. Probably thought about her own kids waiting at home, about the mountain of paperwork, about how the group home was probably worse than taking a chance. I'll need your information, she said to Margaret. We'll do an emergency placement evaluation within 48 hours. If anything doesn't check out, they get moved immediately. Understood? Understood. Margaret filled out forms. Put down Sharon's address at the shelter as her own. Sharon didn't correct it. Margaret signed papers she didn't fully understand, made promises she had no idea how to keep. And then, somehow, she walked out of St. Catherine's with 3 white children who weren't hers, no legal right to them, no plan, and $2.13 in her pocket. The children climbed into her Chevy Malibu. Daniel in front, Emma and Michael in back. Where are we going? Daniel asked quietly. Margaret gripped the steering wheel. She had no home. No food. No money. No idea what she'd just done. Somewhere safe, she said. She drove to the Walmart parking lot on East 14th. The big one that stayed open 24 hours. The one where security didn't hassle people sleeping in their cars as long as you parked far from the entrance. It was 7:30 p.m. Are we sleeping in the car? Emma asked. She was 4. Too young to understand what that meant. Just for tonight, Margaret said. Like camping. I like camping, Michael said. He was 3. He'd probably never been camping in his life. Margaret had one blanket. She put all 3 children in the back seat, wrapped them together, turned on the heat until the gas gauge dropped another notch she couldn't afford. I'm scared, Emma whispered. I know, baby. But I'm right here. And I'm not going anywhere. Daniel looked at her. Promise. Margaret didn't know how she'd keep that promise. Didn't know what would happen when CPS came for the home visit in 48 hours and discovered she lived in a car. Didn't know how she'd feed 3 children when she could barely feed herself. But she looked at Daniel's 2 old eyes and Emma's one-eared rabbit and Michael's thumb in his mouth, and she said it anyway. I promise. The first week was impossible. Margaret's shift at the home health agency started at 6 a.m. She couldn't leave 3 children alone in a car. She couldn't take them with her. She couldn't afford childcare. She called in sick. Lost 2 days' wages. $136 she desperately needed. She drove back to St. Catharines. Found Sharon. I need help, Margaret said simply. Sharon looked at the 3 children in Margaret's car, then at Margaret. The home visit is tomorrow, Sharon said. I know. They're going to see you're homeless. I know. They're going to take those children. I know. Sharon was quiet for a long moment. Then, my sister has a basement apartment. It's not much. She's been trying to rent it for 2 months. No takers. Margaret's throat tightened. I can't afford. $200 a month. Utilities included. 1 bedroom, pull-out couch, bathroom, kitchenette. It's in East Oakland. Not the best neighborhood. Margaret made $1,360 a month before taxes. After taxes, $1,120. Minus $200 for rent would leave $920 for everything else. Food, gas, the payment plan for her mother's medical debt, clothes for 3 growing children. It was impossible. It was her only option. I'll take it. Sharon's sister, Denise, showed her the apartment that afternoon. It was in a building that should have been condemned. Bars on the windows. Mold in the bathroom. The bedroom was barely big enough for a twin mattress. The pull-out couch in the main room was stained and smelled like cigarettes. It was perfect. Margaret moved in that night. She had no furniture except what was there. No dishes, no food, no bedding except the 1 blanket from her car. The CPS worker came the next morning at 10 a.m. Looked around the tiny apartment with barely concealed disgust. This is where you plan to raise 3 children? Yes, ma'am. There's 1 bedroom. The boys can share the pull-out couch. Emma can sleep with me until we get bunk beds. The worker walked through every room. Checked the locks. Ran water in the sink. Opened the empty refrigerator. Where's the food? I get paid Friday, Margaret said. I'll shop then. That's 3 days from now. We'll manage. The worker looked at the children. They sat on the stained couch, clean at least. Margaret had used the last of her money for laundromat quarters and bathed them in the communal shower. Do you want to stay here? The worker asked Daniel. Daniel looked at Margaret. Then back at the worker. Yes, ma'am. Why? Because Miss Margaret promised she wouldn't leave us. The worker's expression softened slightly. She pulled Margaret into the bedroom, out of earshot. I'm approving this for 30 days, she said quietly. But I'm coming back. Unannounced. Multiple times. This place needs to be clean, those children need to be fed and in school, and you need to prove you can provide stability. I will. 1 slip and they're removed. Are we clear? Crystal. The worker left. Margaret stood in that tiny apartment with 3 children who weren't hers, $2.13 in her pocket, and 3 days until payday. She went to the food bank. Stood in line for 2 hours with the children. Got a box of canned goods, pasta, powdered milk, white bread, peanut butter. That night, she made peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. The children ate without complaint. "Is this all we have?" Michael asked. Not whining. Just asking. "For now, baby. But Friday, I'll cook you a real meal. Deal?" "Deal." Margaret slept on the floor that night. Gave Emma the twin mattress. The boys shared the pull-out couch. She could hear them breathing in the dark. Could hear Michael crying softly until Daniel whispered something that made him quiet. She stared at the water-stained ceiling and wondered what she'd done. 3 children. 3 white children in a system that already looked at her sideways for being a black woman barely surviving. But when morning came, and Daniel asked if she was still there, and Margaret said yes, and his whole body relaxed like he'd been holding his breath all night. She knew she'd do whatever it took. The first month was survival. Pure survival. Margaret went back to work. Found a neighbor, Mrs. Chin, who watched the children for $50 a week. It wasn't legal childcare. Mrs. Chen was 70, spoke broken English, chain-smoked on her balcony. But she was kind, and she was there, and she didn't ask questions. Margaret worked 40 hours at the home health agency. Then picked up weekend shifts at a nursing home. 10 hours Saturday, 10 hours Sunday. $10 an hour. $200 extra. She was working 60 hours a week. Sleeping 4 to 5 hours a night. Living on coffee and whatever the children didn't finish. The children needed everything. Clothes. School supplies. Daniel needed glasses. Emma had a tooth that needed pulling. Michael had asthma and needed an inhaler. CPS didn't cover any of it. The foster care stipend was $425 a month per child. $1,275 total. It sounded like a lot until you actually tried to feed, clothe, and care for 3 children. Rent, $200 food, $400, and that was stretching every dollar, Mrs. Chin. $200 utilities that weren't covered, $80 gas for the car, $100 children's clothes from Goodwill, $50 school supplies, $30 miscellaneous, $215. That was $1,275. Exactly. No room for error, no room for emergencies, no room for the broken muffler or the asthma attack or the field trip fee. Margaret's own paychecks went to everything else. The medical debt payment. Soap and shampoo. The glasses Daniel needed. The copay for Emma's tooth extraction. She lost weight. 15 pounds in 2 months. Her scrubs hung loose. Coworkers asked if she was sick. Just busy, she'd say. Busy was an understatement. 6 a.m. Wake up, make breakfast, oatmeal, every day, bought in bulk, 6:30 a.m. Wake the children, get them dressed 7 a.m. Walk them to Mrs. Chen's, save gas, 7:30 a.m. Drive to work 6 p.m. Pick up children 6:30 p.m. Make dinner, pasta, rice and beans, chicken when she could afford it, 7 p.m. Homework with Daniel, 1st grade. Coloring with Emma, pre-K, 8 p.m. Baths 8:30 p.m. Bedtime stories, library books, free, 9 p.m. Laundry, cleaning, meal prep for tomorrow 11 p.m. Collapse midnight. Michael's. Nightmares, wake up, comfort him, back to sleep 4 a.m. Alarm, start again. Weekends were nursing home shifts. Mrs. Chin watched the children. Margaret would work 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., come home exhausted, make dinner, collapse. The CPS worker came unannounced 3 times that first month. Once at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. The apartment was clean. The children were doing homework. The refrigerator had food. Checkmark. Once at 9 a.m. on a Saturday. Margaret was at work. Mrs. Chin was watching them. The worker didn't like it, unlicensed care, but the children were safe, fed, happy. Marginal check mark. Once at 7 p.m. on a Thursday. Dinner on the table. Children clean. Margaret exhausted but present. Final check mark. After the 3rd visit, the worker pulled Margaret aside. "I'm recommending permanent placement," she said. "You're doing well." Margaret's knees almost gave out with relief. "But," the worker continued, "we need to move toward adoption." These children's biological mother terminated her rights. Their aunt terminated hers. They're legally free. You need to decide if you want to adopt them. Adoption. Making it permanent. Making them hers. How long do I have to decide? 6 months. After that, we'll look for adoptive families. Adoptive families. Plural. The 3 of them would be split up. What if no one wants all 3? The worker's expression was answer enough. That night, Margaret sat on the floor of the tiny bedroom while Emma slept on the mattress behind her. She thought about adoption. About legal responsibility. About tying herself permanently to 3 white children in a world that already judged her for existing. About what her life would look like. Forever on the edge. Forever struggling. Forever sacrificing. Then she thought about Daniel's silent tears that first day. About Emma's one-eared rabbit. About Michael whispering, "Is Miss Margaret still here?" every single morning. She thought about the promise she'd made. The decision wasn't hard. Living with it would be. "I'll adopt them," she told the worker at the next visit. The paperwork took 4 months. Background checks, home studies, financial reviews, interviews with the children. A white judge looked at Margaret across a courtroom in August 1995 with something between skepticism and pity. "Miss Davis, do you understand what you're taking on? 3 children, different race, likely trauma, significant needs. And you're a single woman with limited means." Margaret stood straight. "Yes, Your Honor. I understand." "Why are you doing this?" "Because they're mine. And I'm theirs. And nobody else wanted them." The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then signed the papers. Daniel Davis. Emma Davis. Michael Davis. Hers. Legally. Forever. The children cried. Margaret cried. Even the social worker cried a little. They went to McDonald's to celebrate. The same McDonald's where Margaret had bought those first Happy Meals. This time she splurged. $25. Got them ice cream. "Are you our mom now?" Emma asked, chocolate ice cream on her face. Margaret's throat closed. "If you want me to be." All 3 children nodded. "Then yes, baby. I'm your mom." Michael climbed into her lap. Daniel leaned against her shoulder. Emma held her hand. They were hers. The hard part was just beginning. The years that followed were a blur of survival. The children grew. Daniel shot up, gangly and awkward. Emma became fierce and protective. Michael stayed small but developed a wicked sense of humor. They were good kids. Smart kids. Daniel pulled straight A's without trying. Emma tested into the gifted program. Michael learned to read at 4. But they were also traumatized kids. Daniel had panic attacks. Emma hoarded food in her pillowcase. Michael couldn't sleep without checking that Margaret was still there. Therapy would have helped. They couldn't afford therapy. Margaret did what she could. Consistent bedtimes. Family dinners every night, even when she was dead on her feet. Homework at the kitchen table. Church on Sundays. The church, New Hope Baptist, became their community. The congregation was mostly black, mostly working class, mostly people who understood struggle. When Margaret showed up with 3 white children, there were whispers. Some kind, some not. That's Margaret's adopted babies. Bless her heart, taking in those poor children. I heard they were homeless when she found them. White babies though. That's gonna be hard. Pastor Williams shut down the gossip fast. "This is what Matthew 25 looks like," he said from the pulpit one Sunday. "Whoever welcomes a child in my name welcomes me." I don't recall Jesus checking skin color at the door. The congregation came around. Brought hand-me-down clothes. Invited the children to Sunday school. Mrs. Patterson taught Emma to braid hair. Mr. Johnson taught Daniel to play chess. The children were loved. Different, yes. The only white faces in a sea of black and brown. Beloved. School was harder. Margaret enrolled them in the local public school. Hoover Elementary. 95% kids of color. The teachers were surprised to see 3 white children with a black mother. "Are you the foster parent?" the principal asked at registration. "I'm the mother," Margaret said firmly. The principal's expression flickered. "I see. Well, welcome." The children faced questions constantly. Why is your mom black? Are you adopted? Where's your real mom? Daniel learned to say, Margaret is my real mom. Emma learned to say, mind your business. Michael learned to say, we're a family. That's all that matters. But it wore on them. Being different. Being stared at. Being questioned. Margaret saw it. Couldn't fix it. Just held them tighter. The financial struggle never eased. If anything, it got worse. As the children grew, so did costs. Food, clothes, school field trips, sports fees, birthday parties. Margaret worked constantly. 60, sometimes 70 hours a week. The nursing home hired her full-time, better pay but mandatory overtime. She'd work double shifts, come home at midnight, wake up at 5 a.m. to get the kids ready for school. Her body started breaking down. Her knees ached from years of standing. Her back seized up regularly. She developed high blood pressure but couldn't afford the medication, so she rationed it, taking pills every other day instead of daily. The car died when Daniel was 10. Transmission failure. $1,200 to fix. Money she didn't have. She took out a payday loan. 400% interest. It took 2 years to pay off, and by then she'd paid $3,000 for a $1,200 repair. The apartment flooded when Emma was 9. Sewage backup. Denise, the landlord, fixed it eventually, but their belongings were ruined. The couch, the mattress, Daniel's school clothes, Emma's books. Margaret filed a claim. Insurance denied it. Act of God. She bought replacement clothes at Goodwill. Bought a used mattress off Craigslist. Let the kids sleep on the floor until she could afford another couch. Through it all, she never complained. Never let the children see her cry. Never let them feel like they were a burden. But they knew. Kids always know. Daniel started working at 14. Bagging groceries at Safeway. Gave Margaret every paycheck. Baby, that's your money, she'd say. We're a family, he'd reply. That's all that matters. Emma babysat neighbors' kids. Saved every dollar in a coffee can. Michael mowed lawns. Came home with $20 and put it on the kitchen table without a word. Margaret wanted to tell them to stop, to be kids, to not worry about money. But she needed that money. Hated that she needed it. Took it anyway. They were surviving. Barely. But surviving. Then Daniel got into Berkeley. Full scholarship. Academic excellence. He was 17, brilliant, destined for something bigger than East Oakland. Margaret cried when the letter came. Pride and terror in equal measure. You're going, she said. I can't leave you. You're going, she repeated. This is why we did all this. So you could have a future. Daniel went to Berkeley. Majored in computer science. Graduated in 3 years. Emma got into UCLA. Full ride. Psychology. She wanted to help kids like they'd been. Michael got into Stanford. Full scholarship. Engineering. All 3 of them. College. Futures. Everything Margaret had sacrificed for. But the cost of their success was Margaret's health. The years of overtime caught up. Margaret was 56 when Michael graduated high school. Her knees were bone on bone. Her back required surgery she couldn't afford. The high blood pressure had damaged her kidneys. She needed to slow down. Work less. But she couldn't. The bills didn't stop because her body was breaking. The children knew. They called constantly from college. Mom, please see a doctor. Mom, you need to rest. Mom, we'll send money. They were students. They had nothing to send. Margaret kept working. Kept pushing. Kept surviving. Until she couldn't. Margaret collapsed at work when she was 58. Kidney failure. Complete shutdown. She woke up in Highland Hospital with tubes in her arms and 3 adult children she barely recognized surrounding her bed. Daniel was 25 now, working at a tech startup in San Francisco. Emma was 23, finishing her master's in social work. Michael was 21, working on an engineering PhD. Mom, Daniel said, gripping her hand, tears streaming down his face. Margaret tried to smile. I'm okay, baby. You're not okay. Your kidneys failed. I'll be fine. The doctor came in. White woman, 40s, kind eyes. Miss Davis, you need dialysis. 3 times a week, for hours per session. It's not optional. How much does that cost? Your insurance should cover most of it. I don't have insurance. The room went cold. You don't have insurance? Emma's voice cracked. I couldn't afford it. The premiums were $400 a month. Daniel stood up, paced. How long have you not had insurance? 5 years. 5. He couldn't finish. Just stood there, shaking. The doctor looked at Margaret with something close to pity. Without insurance, dialysis costs about $90,000 a year. There are programs, charity care, but I'll figure it out, Margaret said. Mom, you can't figure this out, Emma said. This is life or death. I've been dealing with life or death for 30 years. I'll manage. But even as she said it, Margaret knew this was different. This wasn't something she could work an extra shift to fix. This wasn't something she could sacrifice sleep or meals to survive. This was the bill coming due for 3 decades of putting everyone else first. The children moved fast. Daniel quit his job at the startup, moved back to Oakland, got a job at a big tech company with better insurance. Added Margaret to his plan. Emma deferred her PhD program, took a full-time social work job, started sending Margaret $500 a month. Michael dropped out of Stanford, got an engineering job at Tesla, sent every spare dollar home. No, Margaret said when she found out. Absolutely not. You don't sacrifice your futures for me. You sacrificed everything for us, Daniel said simply. Now it's our turn. They took care of her, drove her to dialysis, paid her rent, bought her groceries. For 2 years, the 3 of them kept Margaret alive through sheer force of will and financial sacrifice. But dialysis wasn't a cure. It was a stopgap. What Margaret needed was a kidney transplant. Daniel tested. Not a match. Emma tested. Not a match. Michael tested. Not a match. None of them matched. Different biology. Different blood types. Margaret went on the transplant list. Was told the wait was 3 to 5 years. Maybe longer for her blood type. She didn't have 3 to 5 years. The children knew it. Margaret knew it. The doctors knew it. There has to be something, Daniel said at yet another doctor's appointment. The list moves slowly, the transplant coordinator said. We prioritize based on medical need and time waiting. Your mother qualifies, but how much would it cost to buy a kidney? Emma asked bluntly. That's illegal in the United States. That's not what I asked. The coordinator's expression hardened. I can't help you with that. They left the hospital in silence. That night, the 3 of them sat in Margaret's tiny apartment, the same one she'd moved into 25 years ago, and made a decision. We find her a kidney, Daniel said. Whatever it takes. How? Michael asked. I don't know yet, but we're smart. We have resources now. We figure it out. What they didn't know was that figuring it out would cost them everything they'd built. Daniel went first. He'd been working at Meta for 2 years. Senior software engineer. Making $350,000 a year. Stock options worth another $200,000. He was also dating someone. Sophia. White, wealthy, from old San Francisco money. They'd been together for a year. Talking about marriage. At a dinner with her parents, her father a venture capitalist, her mother on several nonprofit boards, Daniel mentioned Margaret's situation. I'm trying to find her a kidney donor, he said. The list is too long. Sophia's mother, Catherine, looked up from her wine. Your mother needs a kidney? My mom, Margaret. She raised me and my siblings. The foster mother. Adoptive mother, Daniel corrected. Of course. Catherine's tone was pleasant but dismissive. Have you looked into medical tourism? I've heard kidneys are available in India, Philippines. Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. I'm not buying a kidney from someone being exploited. It's not exploitation if they're willing sellers. Mom, Sophia said quietly. I'm just being practical, darling. The conversation moved on. But Daniel couldn't shake it. A week later, Sophia brought it up. My mother mentioned she could help, Sophia said. They were in his apartment. She sits on the board at UCSF Medical Center. She could potentially move your mother up the transplant list. Daniel's head snapped up. How? Donations. Influence. It's how these things work. That's not how it should work. But it's how it does work. Sophia sat beside him. Daniel, I love you. And I want to help. But you have to be realistic. Your mother is... Is what? Sophia hesitated. She's not going to get a kidney through normal channels. The wait is too long. She's too old, too sick. This is the only way. By bribing hospital administrators? By leveraging connections. There's a difference. No, there isn't. They fought for 3 hours. It ended with Sophia saying something that cracked everything open. You know what your problem is? You're so busy trying to save someone who couldn't even take care of herself that you're destroying your own future. She made her choices. You don't owe her your life. Daniel stood up. Get out. What? Get out of my apartment. We're done. Daniel, I didn't mean... Yeah, you did. And that tells me everything I need to know. Sophia left. Daniel sat in his empty apartment and realized something. He'd spent 2 years building a life in tech, in San Francisco, in spaces where people like Margaret didn't exist. Where poverty was a moral failing. Where sacrifice was stupid instead of noble. He'd almost lost himself. The next morning, he quit Meta. His boss was shocked. You're on track for promotion. Another year and you'll be making $500,000. I need to help my mother. Can't you do that while working here? No. I need to focus completely. Find her a donor. And I can't do that while optimizing ad algorithms. He cashed out his stock options. $180,000 after taxes. Used it to hire a medical advocate, a team of specialists, and to start a foundation, Second Chance Kidneys, dedicated to helping low-income patients find living donors. Everyone thought he was insane. You're throwing away your career, former colleagues said. You can't fix the system, friends warned. Daniel didn't care. Margaret had given up everything for him. He could give up a tech job. Emma's sacrifice looked different. She'd finally landed her dream job. Clinical director at a nonprofit serving foster youth. $75,000 a year. Not much by Bay Area standards, but significant for social work. The work was meaningful. She was helping kids who'd been through what she'd been through. Making a difference. But it required 60-hour weeks. Evening crisis calls. Weekend home visits. She didn't have time to help find Margaret a donor. Didn't have energy to research medical options. She had to choose. At a staff meeting, her boss announced they'd received a major grant. $2 million to expand services. We're doubling our caseload, her boss said. Which means we need everyone at 100%. No exceptions. Emma thought about Margaret, deteriorating on dialysis. Thought about Daniel working alone to find a donor. Thought about Michael still sending half his paycheck home. She raised her hand. I need to request a leave of absence. The room went quiet. For how long? Her boss asked. I don't know. My mother is dying. She needs a kidney. I need to help find one. Her boss's expression was sympathetic but firm. Emma, I understand family emergencies. We have FMLA, but that's 12 weeks maximum unpaid. I might need longer. Then I can't hold your position. Emma looked around the room. At the work she loved. The kids who needed her. The career she'd spent 6 years building. Then she thought about Margaret sleeping on the floor so Emma could have a mattress. About peanut butter sandwiches for dinner. About a woman who'd chosen 3 strangers over her own comfort. I resign, Emma said. Her boss tried to talk her out of it. Colleagues sent concerned emails. Her mentor called it career suicide. Emma didn't waver. She joined Daniel. Started volunteering at dialysis centers, talking to patients, building a network of people searching for donors. Together, they created something unprecedented. A donor matching program that prioritized need over ability to pay. It was working. They'd matched 12 donors to recipients in 6 months. But none for Margaret. Michael's turn came differently. He'd stayed at Stanford, finished his PhD in 3 years. Brilliant work on renewable energy systems. Multiple companies wanted him. He chose a startup. Clean energy. World-changing potential. Salary of $200,000 plus equity. But the equity required he stay 5 years for full vesting. Leave early, lose millions. He'd been there 9 months when Daniel called. We found a potential donor, Daniel said. Woman in Sacramento. She's a match for Mom. But she needs $50,000 for her own medical expenses. She's willing to donate if we cover it. That's legal? Michael asked. Covering donor expenses is legal. We're not buying the kidney. We're removing her financial barrier to donation. Where do we get $50,000? I have some left from Meta. Emma's been saving. But we're short $20,000. Michael looked at his equity statement. He was vested in $80,000 so far. But cashing out meant leaving the company. Meant walking away from potentially millions. I'll get it, he said. He quit the next day. Cashed out his equity. $80,000 became $60,000 after taxes. More than they needed. His boss was furious. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. This company will be worth billions. And my mother will be dead. I know which matters more. 3 brilliant careers. 3 massive sacrifices. All for a woman who'd given them everything when she had nothing. They pooled their resources. Covered the donor's expenses. Scheduled the transplant. And that's when everything fell apart. The hospital ethics board blocked it. Margaret sat in a conference room at UCSF Medical Center, Daniel, Emma, and Michael on either side of her, facing 5 board members. We have concerns, Dr. Patricia Morrison, the board chair, said. She was white, 60s, the kind of doctor who'd never missed a meal or worried about rent. About the financial arrangement with the donor. We covered her medical expenses, Daniel said. That's legal. Technically legal, yes. But ethically questionable. $50,000 is a substantial sum. She needed it for her own surgery. A surgery she'd been delaying because she couldn't afford it. We removed the barrier. Or, Dr. Morrison said carefully, you created an incentive for a desperate person to make a risky medical decision. Emma leaned forward. She's not desperate. She's generous. She wants to help. We've interviewed her. She's a single mother, minimum wage job, eviction notice. She needs money. That's coercion. That's capitalism, Michael said sharply. She's poor, so she can't make autonomous decisions? Is that what you're saying? Dr. Morrison's expression tightened. We're saying this arrangement exploits vulnerability. You know what exploits vulnerability? Daniel's voice rose. A healthcare system that lets people die because they can't afford treatment. A transplant list that prioritizes the wealthy. A board that blocks legal donor matches while rich people get kidneys within months. Mr. Davis, I understand you're upset. You don't understand anything. Daniel stood. My mother raised 3 kids on food stamps and night shifts. She worked herself into kidney failure keeping us alive. And now you're telling me she can't have a donor because the donor isn't rich enough to donate for free. The room went silent. Another board member, Dr. James Chin, spoke. The donor's financial situation creates an unequal power dynamic. Every donor-recipient relationship has power dynamics, Emma said. She'd switched into social worker mode. Familial obligation, guilt, expectation. But we don't block those. We only block this one because the donor is poor. That's not fair, Dr. Morrison said. None of this is fair, Margaret said quietly. Everyone turned to her. She'd been silent until now. This whole system is unfair, Margaret continued. Her voice was weak but steady. Rich people get kidneys. Poor people die. That's the truth. But my kids found someone willing to help, someone we're helping in return, and you want to stop it because it makes you uncomfortable. She looked at each board member. If I was rich, would we be having this conversation? No one answered. Let the woman donate, Margaret said. Or let me die. But don't pretend this is about ethics when it's really about class. The board deliberated for 2 hours. They denied the transplant. We cannot in good conscience approve an arrangement that may constitute undue inducement, Dr. Morrison said. Margaret walked out of that hospital knowing she'd been sentenced to death by bureaucracy. Daniel, Emma, and Michael were devastated and furious. "We're going public," Daniel said. He called every journalist he knew from his tech days. Pitched the story, "Hospital Ethics Board denies dying woman kidney over donor's poverty." Most passed. Too complicated. Too nuanced. But one reporter bit. Jessica Winters from the San Francisco Chronicle. She'd covered healthcare inequality for years. Jessica interviewed Margaret, the children, the donor. Interviewed ethicists, transplant specialists, other patients who'd been denied. The story ran on the front page. "Dying mother denied transplant because donor too poor." The subhead, "UCSF Ethics Board blocks kidney donation over financial assistance to living donor." The article was devastating. It included Margaret's story, the children's sacrifices, the donor's own medical needs, the board's reasoning. It quoted a bioethicist, "We've created a system where only the wealthy can afford to donate organs. And then we punish the poor for trying to participate." The story went viral. Within 24 hours, national outlets picked it up. CNN, The New York Times, NPR. Social media exploded. #Justice for Margaret trended. People shared their own stories of being denied care, of watching loved ones die while bureaucrats debated ethics. The hospital was flooded with calls. Donors from across the country volunteered. Thousands of people offered money for Margaret's care. UCSF issued a statement, "We stand by our ethics board's decision. Patient safety and donor autonomy are our highest priorities." It made everything worse. Protesters showed up outside the hospital, carrying signs. "Poor people deserve kidneys too. Ethics or eugenics?" The story became about more than Margaret. It became about who deserves to live. About whether poverty disqualifies you from healthcare. About a system that protects the rich while the poor die waiting. Daniel, Emma, and Michael did interviews. Told their story. How Margaret had saved them. How the system was killing her. "She chose us when we had nothing," Daniel told CNN. "Now the hospital says someone can't choose her because they have nothing. Where's the ethics in that?" The board held a second review. Under pressure. Under scrutiny. They upheld their decision. "We cannot set a precedent that allows financial transactions to influence organ donation," Dr. Morrison said in a press conference. A reporter shouted, "But you allow emotional transactions? Family obligation? Social pressure? Why is money the only unethical influence?" Dr. Morrison had no answer. The children were out of options. Out of money. Out of time. Margaret's health was deteriorating. The dialysis was failing. Her body was shutting down. She had weeks, maybe. "I'm sorry," Margaret told her children. "I'm sorry I'm putting you through this." "Don't," Emma said, crying. "Don't apologize. I should have taken better care of myself." "Should have." "You took care of us," Daniel said. "That's what you should have done. And that's what you did." Margaret smiled weakly. "I'd do it again. All of it. Every sacrifice. You three are the best thing I ever did." They sat with her in that hospital room, holding her hands, telling her stories about their childhood, remembering. "I never knew how you did it," Michael said. 3 kids. No money. No help. "I had help," Margaret said. "Sharon. Denise. The church. Mrs. Chen. People showed up. But you carried the weight. That's what mothers do." Emma broke down. "It's not fair. You gave us everything. And now you're giving me everything," Margaret interrupted. "You quit your jobs. Spent your savings. Fought for me. That's more than I ever expected." "It's not enough," Daniel said. "It's everything." Margaret closed her eyes. "If this is how it ends, I'm okay. Because you're okay. You're successful, kind, strong. You became everything I hoped. That's enough." But it wasn't enough for them. That night, Daniel made a decision. "We go to the media again," he said. "But bigger. We find every person the hospital has denied. Every poor donor who's been blocked. Every patient who died waiting. We make this so big they can't ignore it." "It won't change their decision," Emma said. "Maybe not. But it might change the system." They spent 3 days building a case. found 47 patients who'd been denied transplants over donor financial concerns. 47 people who died or were dying because the ethics board deemed poor donors ethically compromised. They compiled medical records, donor interviews, board meeting minutes. And they leaked everything to Jessica Winters. The second story was a bomb. UCSF denied 47 transplants over donor poverty. 23 patients died waiting. The hospital couldn't hide anymore. Couldn't spin it as one complicated case. This was systemic. This was policy. This was eugenics with a medical degree. The state attorney general opened an investigation. The hospital board called emergency meetings. Donors and patients filed a class action lawsuit. UCSF's ethics board was suspended pending review. And in the chaos, a loophole appeared. A different hospital, Highland in Oakland, where Margaret had first collapsed, offered to do the transplant. Their ethics board had different standards. They reviewed the case and approved it. "We don't see this as coercion," their board chair said. "We see this as mutual aid. Two people helping each other. That's medicine." The donor was willing. Margaret qualified. The surgery was scheduled for 2 weeks out. For the first time in months, there was hope. But Margaret was too weak. The night before the surgery, her kidneys failed completely. Toxins flooded her system. She went into cardiac arrest. They revived her. Barely. The transplant surgeon came to Daniel in the ICU waiting room at 2 a.m. "She's not strong enough for surgery," he said gently. "Her heart can't take it." "I'm sorry." Daniel stared at him. "So that's it? She just dies? We'll keep her comfortable. But yes, I'm sorry." Daniel walked into Margaret's room. She was unconscious. Machines breathing for her. Tubes everywhere. Emma and Michael were already there. They stood around her bed, these 3 white kids she'd raised, watching the woman who'd saved them slip away. "We failed her," Emma whispered. "No," a voice said from the doorway. "They turned." Sharon, Margaret's old friend from St. Catherine's. She'd been following the story. Driven from Oakland to be there. "You didn't fail," Sharon said, walking to the bed. "You fought. You sacrificed. You did everything she taught you." "It wasn't enough," Michael said. "It was everything." Sharon touched Margaret's hand. "This woman took 3 children no one wanted and loved them into the people you became. You did the same for her. You loved her. That's not failure." They stayed with Margaret for 3 days. Took turns holding her hand. Talking to her. Thanking her. On the 3rd day, with all 3 children surrounding her, Margaret stopped breathing. The machine screamed. Nurses rushed in. But the children waved them off. "Let her go," Daniel said quietly. They held her as she died. Held each other. And said goodbye to the woman who'd been their whole world. The funeral was massive. The church, New Hope Baptist, was packed. 400 people. Black, white, brown. Rich, poor, in between. People Margaret had helped over the years. People the children had helped through their foundation. People who'd followed the story and been moved. Pastor Williams gave the eulogy. "Margaret Davis lived 71 years, he said. And in that time, she showed us what love looks like. Not the easy love. The hard love. The love that sacrifices. The love that shows up. The love that chooses people when everyone else walks away." He looked at Daniel, Emma, and Michael in the front row. She saved 3 children. But they saved her too. Gave her purpose. Gave her joy. Gave her a reason to keep fighting when everything said quit. His voice broke. And at the end, when the system failed her, they fought like she'd taught them. They didn't accept it. They challenged it. They tried to change it. The church was silent except for weeping. That's Margaret's legacy. Not that she died waiting for a kidney, but that she lived giving everything for others. And that her children learned to do the same. They buried her at Mountain View Cemetery. Simple headstone. Margaret Davis, 1954 to 2025, she chose love. The children stood at her grave long after everyone left. "What do we do now?" Emma asked. Daniel looked at his siblings. "We keep going. Keep fighting. Finish what she started." "How?" Michael asked. "The foundation. Second chance kidneys. We scale it. Make it national. Change the laws. Make sure no one else dies because they're too poor to be worth saving. They had no money, no jobs, no plan, but they had each other. And they had Margaret's example. That would have to be enough. 6 months after Margaret's death, Daniel got a call from a lawyer. Mr. Davis, I'm calling about a client who wishes to remain anonymous. They're prepared to donate $5 million to your foundation in Margaret's honor. Daniel almost dropped the phone. $5 million? Yes. They read about your mother. They want to help ensure her story leads to systemic change. The donation came through. Then another. $2 million from a tech CEO. $1 million from a nonprofit coalition. People were paying attention. Second Chance Kidneys grew. Hired staff. Opened offices in 5 cities. Helped 200 patients find donors in the first year. Daniel ran it full-time. Emma managed patient advocacy. Michael handled tech infrastructure. They didn't take salaries. Lived off savings. Worked 80-hour weeks. 2 years after Margaret's death, California passed the Margaret Davis Healthcare Equity Act. Required ethics boards to prove donor coercion, not just assume it. Prohibited discrimination based on donor financial status. 3 years after, the foundation had helped 847 patients receive transplants. 847 people alive because 3 siblings refused to accept their mother's death as inevitable. But success didn't heal the wound. Daniel still woke up wanting to call Margaret. Emma still set an extra plate at dinner sometimes. Michael still had nightmares about that hospital room. They carried the grief. Used it as fuel. On the 4th anniversary of Margaret's death, they stood at her grave with hundreds of transplant recipients. People alive because of the system they'd built. She'd be proud, Emma said. She'd tell us we're working too hard, Michael added. Daniel smiled. Then she'd work twice as hard herself. They laid flowers on the headstone. Red roses. Margaret's favorite. As they turned to leave, Emma stopped. Wait. She knelt by the grave, pulled an envelope from her pocket. The one the lawyer had handed Margaret that day. The one with the $500,000 checks they'd tried to give her. Margaret had refused them. Save it, she'd said. Help others. They'd used the money to seed the foundation. We kept our promise, Emma whispered. We helped others. Just like you taught us. Daniel and Michael knelt beside her. We love you, Mom, Daniel said. We miss you, Michael added. The wind moved through the cemetery. For just a moment, they could almost feel her there. Telling them she loved them. Telling them she was proud. Telling them to keep going. They stood, walked back to their car, and drove to the foundation office. There was work to do. People to help. A system to change. Margaret had started them on this path 30 years ago when she bought 3 hungry children Happy Meals with money she didn't have. They were still on it. And they'd stay on it until the system she died fighting was nothing but a memory. Daniel Davis is now CEO of Second Chance Kidneys, the nation's largest living donor matching organization. He never went back to tech. Emma Davis runs the Margaret Davis Center for Healthcare Equity, providing free patient advocacy for low-income transplant candidates. Michael Davis created an app connecting potential donors with recipients, eliminating geographic barriers. It's facilitated over 2,000 transplants. Together, they've helped change laws in 12 states. Margaret's story forced a national conversation about healthcare access, organ donation ethics, and who deserves to live. The UCSF Ethics Board was disbanded and rebuilt with new standards prioritizing equity over optics. 47 patients who'd been denied transplants received them within 2 years of the investigation. But this story isn't about them. It's about a homeless woman who chose 3 children no one wanted. It's about sacrifice no one saw and love no one valued until it was gone. It's about a system that kills the poor while protecting the rich. And it's about 3 people who refused to let their mother's death be meaningless.